At her graduation, my daughter publicly humiliated me, praising her stepdad. "My real dad never did anything," she said. I smiled, walked out, and emptied the $91,000 college fund I'd built for 18 years. The weight of the camera bag on the passenger seat felt heavier than its contents. It was a Canon EOS R, a beautiful piece of engineering I'd spent 2 months researching. A graduation gift for my daughter, Emma. 18 years old, high school valedictorian, and accepted to the state university on a full academic scholarship. As I drove the familiar 20-minute route to my ex-wife's house, a swell of pride made my chest tight. This was it, the culmination of everything. I'm a structural engineer. My world revolves around foundations, load-bearing walls, and the unseen, unglamorous framework that keeps everything from collapsing. In many ways, that's how I'd approached fatherhood, especially after the divorce. Sarah and I split when Emma was 7, and I made a promise to myself that my daughter's life wouldn't crumble because of it. I was the every other weekend dad, the Wednesday night dinner dad that had never missed a child support payment dad. I was the foundation, solid, reliable, and mostly invisible. The camera was for her photography minor. She talked about it with a passion that lit up her face, a fire I wanted to pour gasoline on. This felt different than just paying a bill. It was a gift that saw her, the artist she was becoming. A memory surfaced unbidden from about 8 years ago. Emma, all of 10 years old, stood backstage at a piano recital, her hands clammy and trembling. She was about to go on, and her face was a mask of pure terror. I knelt beside her, the smell of dusty curtains and old wood filling the air. I didn't have the words to soothe her, the kind of flowery reassurances Sarah was so good at. Instead, I pulled a folded blueprint from my jacket pocket. "Look at this, sweetheart," I'd whispered, pointing to a complex latticework of lines. "See this bridge? It looks big and scary, but it's held up by hundreds of these little steel bolts and concrete pilings you can't even see. Each one does its job, and the whole thing stays strong. You're one of the strong pieces, Emmy. You've practiced. You've done the work. The foundation is solid. You got this." She'd looked at the drawing, then at me, and a tiny bit of the fear had receded from her eyes. She went out and played flawlessly. That's what I did. I built foundations. The most important one was the $529 college savings plan I'd started the month she was born. I called it the Emma Fund in my Quicken software. For 18 years, a piece of every paycheck went into it. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Accord, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because a car payment was another $100 that could be compounding in that fund. I took modest vacations. I patched my own roof. The result was sitting in a Charles Schwab account, $91,437. Enough to cover her housing, books, and any expense the scholarship didn't. It was my quiet, 18-year-long grand gesture. My thoughts drifted to her stepfather, Derek. Sarah had married him 4 years ago. He sold commercial insurance and carried himself like a hedge fund manager. He leased a new BMW every 2 years and posted incessantly about his hustle and investments. At a family dinner last Christmas, he'd loudly admired his new Rolex, then asked me what year my Accord was with a pitying little smile. Sarah had just nervously rushed to the kitchen to get more bread. Derek wasn't a bad guy, necessarily. He just seemed to live in a world of surfaces of shiny things meant to be seen. I lived in a world of rebar and concrete, the stuff that was meant to be hidden. I just hoped Emma understood the difference. The backyard of Sarah and Derek's rented house, in the expensive part of town, of course, was buzzing. The smell of grilled burgers hung in the humid evening air, mingling with the scent of freshly cut grass. String lights were draped between the trees, casting a warm, festive glow on the 50 or so faces of family, friends, and teachers. I grabbed a beer, feeling a genuine sense of peace. For all our differences, we had come together for Emma. This was a good day. I was chatting with one of Emma's teachers, a woman who couldn't stop praising her work ethic when the clinking of a knife against a beer bottle cut through the chatter. Derek stood on a raised deck, his arm draped possessively around Emma's shoulders. He had that easy, salesman smile plastered on his face. Everyone, if I could have your attention for just a minute, he boomed, his voice unnaturally amplified by a small portable speaker he'd set up. I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Emma's incredible achievement. As her stepdad, I couldn't be prouder of the amazing young woman she's become. He paused for effect, then his grin widened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys, dangling them so the polished Honda logo caught the light. Emma, he declared, those keys belong to the brand-new Honda Civic sitting in the driveway. It's yours, sweetheart. The yard erupted. Emma let out a theatrical scream and threw her arms around Derek, jumping up and down. Everyone was clapping, whistling, cheering. I clapped too, a genuine smile on my face. It was a hell of a gift, and she deserved it. A little part of me, the part that had been planning to give her the camera, felt a sting. A camera, no matter how nice, couldn't compete with a car. And a heads-up would have been nice. But I pushed the thought away. This was her moment. Then, things took a turn. Emma, beaming, took the small microphone from Derek. Thank you so much, Derek. Oh my God, I can't believe this. Her voice, full of emotion, carried over the entire yard. She turned, and her eyes found me in the crowd. I smiled, ready to be acknowledged, to share in this moment. You know, she continued, her gaze locked on mine. Growing up, I always wondered what it would feel like to have a dad who actually cared about me. The air went still. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I could feel the eyes of the people around me shift from Emma to me. I kept the smile fixed on my face, telling myself she was just excited, caught up in the moment. Someone who would do things like this, she said, holding up the keys as if they were Excalibur. Someone who would make grand gestures and show me I mattered. The bad feeling wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a certainty. This wasn't a gaffe. This was a speech. Her eyes, which I knew as well as my own, weren't filled with simple joy. They were filled with a kind of defiant purpose. And then she delivered the killing blow, her voice clear and steady, aimed directly at me across 20 yards of stunned silence. My stepdad bought me a car, she announced, never breaking eye contact. My real dad never did anything like this. I guess now I know what it feels like to have someone who actually wants to invest in my future. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. 50 people, moments ago celebrating, were now trapped in a theater of my public humiliation. I saw my cousin Jake's knuckles turn white around his beer bottle. A few of Emma's teachers were suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. And Derek just stood there, his arms still around my daughter, a smug, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He had won. Sarah stood beside them, her face pale, refusing to look at me. This was planned. This was a coup, orchestrated by Derek and executed by my daughter. In that one moment, 18 years of my life, the scraped knees, the late-night homework help, the financial sacrifices, the quiet foundational support, were publicly declared null and void. I was erased. I could have screamed. I could have listed every check I'd ever written, every school event I'd ever attended. I could have roared about the $91,000 sitting in her college fund. Instead, I took a slow breath. My smile, I'm told, never wavered. I pushed through the frozen crowd. People parted from me like I was a ghost. I walked up the steps of the deck, stood in front of my daughter, and gave her a hug. Her body was stiff in my arms. Congratulations, sweetheart. I whispered in her hair, my voice steady. I'm really proud of you. Then I let go, turned around, walked down the steps, through the yard, out the gate, and never looked back. The 10-year-old Honda Accord started with a familiar, comforting rumble. I pulled away from the curb, the sound of the party already fading behind me. For the first few blocks, I felt nothing. A profound, hollow numbness. My brain was simply refusing to process the scene it had just witnessed. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even. It was as if another man, a calmer, more detached version of myself, was driving. Then the images started to flash behind my eyes, sharp and cruel. Emma's face, not filled with glee, but with a cold, rehearsed righteousness. The triumphant smirk on Derek's face. Sarah's averted gaze, the coward's response. And the phrase, a dagger twisting in my gut, over and over, invest in my future. He invested in her future with a cosign loan on a depreciating asset. I invested in her future with 18 years of disciplined sacrifice, building a tax-advantage fund that would give her a debt-free start to adult life. The absurdity of it was so stark, so utterly insane, that a single, harsh laugh escaped my lips. It sounded alien in the quiet car. The numbness began to recede, replaced by a wave of hurt so intense it was physical. It felt like a stone was sitting on my chest, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just an insult. It was an erasure, a public declaration that my fatherhood had been a failure, that my steady, quiet love was worthless compared to a flashy gift. They hadn't just preferred him, they had invalidated me. And Emma had been the one to swing the axe. By the time I turned onto the highway, the hurt was beginning to cool, to harden. It was crystallizing into something else. Something cold, clear, and sharp. It was resolve. An engineer's resolve. When a structure is declared unsound, you don't keep patching it. You condemn it. You withdraw support. You let it stand or fall on its own new, flawed foundation. Emma was 18, a legal adult. She had stood on a stage of her own, making and delivered a verdict. She had chosen her father. She had chosen her investor. A choice made that publicly, that deliberately, demanded an equally deliberate response. The emotional, heartbroken father was fading. The pragmatic, rational engineer was taking over. I pulled into my driveway, the house dark and silent. I walked inside, the camera bag still slung over my shoulder. I dropped it on the floor with a thud. I didn't want to look at it. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of whiskey, and dialed my older brother, David. He picked up on the second ring. Art, I just left. Are you okay? I was about to come find you. I'm home, I said, my voice flatter than I expected. What the hell was that? He spat, his anger a welcome contrast to my cold calm. I wanted to rip that microphone out of her hand. And Derek, standing there like he just won the Super Bowl. He did win, Dave, I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. He won. He got exactly what he wanted. That wasn't a speech, Art, David said, his voice dropping. He's a lawyer, and I could hear his analytical mind clicking into place. That was an assassination, a character assassination, and they put the weapon in her hand because they knew no one would shoot back at the kid. She's not a kid anymore, I said softly. She's 18. She made a choice. There was a pause. So what are you going to do? He asked. I looked out the window into the dark, quiet street. My street, the one I lived on to stay close to her. I'm going to honor her choice, I said. Completely. I'm going to give her exactly what she said she wanted. A world where Derek is the one who invests in her future. And I am the one who never did anything. Sleep didn't come. I sat in my living room until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds, the whiskey glass empty on the table beside me. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of stark, cold clarity. There was no anger left, no tears. There was only the quiet hum of a decision made. On Monday morning, I didn't go to the office. I told my boss I needed a personal day. I sat down at my desk, the same desk where I'd helped Emma with her calculus homework over Zoom during the pandemic, and I began to dismantle the foundation. The first call was the easiest and the hardest. I logged into my Charles Schwab account. The screen glowed with the numbers I knew by heart. $91,437.18. 18 years of my life, distilled into a figure. I thought of the overtime hours, the skipped lunches, the meticulously planned contributions. I saw it as a tower I had built for her, brick by brick. With 3 clicks, I initiated a full transfer of the entire balance into my personal brokerage account. The confirmation screen popped up. Your transfer is being processed. The tower was gone. It felt like an amputation, a profound loss, but also a strange, weightless liberation. The burden of being the silent provider was lifted. The second call was to my auto insurance company. I navigated the automated menus until I reached a human being. Hello, I said, my voice even. I'd like to remove a driver and a vehicle from my policy, effective at the end of the month. I gave them Emma's name and the details of her old used car, the one I'd bought for her to learn on. The agent was cheerful and efficient. There was no emotion in it. It was just business. A transaction. The third call was to AT&T. Same process. Same calm, detached voice, my voice. I requested that Emma's line be removed from my family plan. The representative asked if she would be setting up her own account. I believe so, I said. You'll have to speak with her or her stepfather, Derek. I gave him Derek's name. It was important to be specific. Responsibility needed a name and a destination. With each action, I felt the ties being neatly, cleanly severed. These weren't the important ties of love and history. Those had been shredded by Emma herself on that deck. These were the practical, financial ties, the plumbing and wiring of my support that she had taken for granted her entire life. She thought fatherhood was a brand new car and a public speech. She was about to get a crash course in what it really entailed. I leaned back in my chair. The house was silent. I had been erased from her narrative of support, so I had erased my support from her reality. It was perfectly symmetrical. An engineer's solution. Derek wanted to be the hero, the investor, the grand gesture guy. Fine. He could have it all. He could handle the insurance premiums, the phone bills, the unexpected flat tires, the oil changes. He could handle the day-to-day, unglamorous, invisible work of being a parent. He wanted the credit. Now he was getting the ledger. A week went by in silence. I went to work, designed foundations for a new office building, and came home to an empty house. I didn't hear from Sarah or Emma or Derek. It was an unnerving quiet, the calm before a storm I knew was coming. David's word from that night echoed in my head. Nothing is free with guys like that. It was a loose thread, and I couldn't stop myself from pulling on it. On my lunch break, I did some research. I found the website for the Honda dealership near their house. They were having a sign-and-drive event. Grand gestures on a budget. I felt a cynical smile touch my lips. Then, on a whim, I decided to drive by the dealership on my way home from work. I walked in, feigning the casual interest of a browse customer. I struck up a conversation with a young salesman, mentioning that my niece had just gotten a new Civic from them as a graduation gift. Oh yeah? A white Civic? The salesman asked, his eyes lighting up. We just sold one of those last week. Great car. It was a huge surprise, I said, leaning in conspiratorially. Her stepdad bought it for her. I'm just curious, what does a gift like that even set you back? The salesman laughed. Well, he didn't exactly buy it. He co-signed. Most people do for their kids. We got her a great financing rate, though. He winked. A co-signer, not a buyer. The thread was unraveling. That's great. I said, my mind racing. It must be tough for an 18-year-old to qualify, even with a co-signer. Oh, for sure, he said, puffing out his chest a little, proud of his financial wizardry. Her stepdad's credit was okay, but a little stretched. The key was the girl's financial guarantor. Her real dad, I think. Excellent income, solid history. With his backing on the application, the bank approved it no problem. The world tilted slightly. My blood ran cold. Her real dad? I asked, keeping my voice level. Yeah, he was listed as a financial reference, a guarantor for her ability to pay down the line. We didn't even need to call him. His credit score was high enough that the system just verified it automatically. It sealed the deal. I felt a surge of ice-cold fury. They hadn't just used my daughter to humiliate me. They had used my name, my financial stability, the very thing I had built through years of quiet discipline, to fraudulently secure the loan for the weapon they used against me. This wasn't just an insult anymore. This was fraud. I thanked the salesman and walked out, my heart pounding a steady, angry rhythm. The storm was no longer coming. I was going to become the storm. 2 days later, the inevitable call came from a private number. It was the bank's financing department. Mr. Arthur Jensen, a polite professional voice asked. This is he, I said. Sir, we're doing a routine follow-up on a loan for an Emma Jensen, for which you were listed as a financial guarantor. We just need to verify a few details. I took a deep breath. I'm happy to verify, I said, my voice calm and clear. First, I can verify that I did not give anyone permission to list me as a financial guarantor on any loan application. Second, I can verify that I will not be, now or in the future, providing any financial support for Ms. Emma Jensen. All of her financial matters are now the sole responsibility of her stepfather, Mr. Derek Thatcher. I would recommend you direct any and all future questions to him. I trust his finances are as impressive as the grand gestures they pay for. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the frantic clicking of a keyboard. Sir, are you saying you are formally withdrawing your financial backing? I'm saying it was never there to begin with, I replied. It was a fiction. I suggest you check your other fictions as well. I hung up. The house of cards had a structural flaw, and I had just pulled out the cornerstone. The silence after that phone call lasted for exactly 9 days. It was a tense, charged quiet. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID read Sarah. I let it ring 4 times, took a deep breath, and answered. I didn't even get a hello. They took her car. Sarah's voice was a shriek, high-pitched and laced with disbelief and fury. A tow truck came this morning and took her car right out of the driveway. The bank is saying you told them you wouldn't support her. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out the window at the city skyline. That's correct, Sarah, I said, my voice measured and calm. It seemed to make her even angrier. Correct. Art, what is wrong with you? That was her graduation gift. How could you do that to her? Let's be very clear about a few things, I said, the patience I'd cultivated for years finally gone. First, I didn't do anything. I simply told the bank the truth when they called me, that my name was used on a loan application without my consent, and that I would not be financially responsible for it. That's called correcting a fraudulent document. Fraudulent? Derek was just trying to do something nice. Second, I continued, ignoring her protest. It wasn't a gift. It was a loan with Emma as the primary borrower, a loan you and Derek couldn't secure without using my financial reputation. And third, Emma made her choice of financial provider very clear in front of 50 people. She announced she has a new father to invest in her future. I simply formalized the arrangement. It seems the new investor's portfolio is a little shakier than advertised. Sarah was sputtering, a mixture of rage and panic. You're being cruel. You're punishing her for one stupid comment. It wasn't one stupid comment, Sarah. It was a planned public execution of my character. And you stood there and let it happen. You let Derek use our daughter as a prop to soothe his fragile ego. So, no, I'm not being cruel. I'm being consequential. Actions have consequences. This is one of them. I hung up before she could respond. The peace I felt was immediate and profound. But the war had just begun. That evening, the first salvo was fired on the second front, social media. Sarah's sister, Karen, a woman who considered Derek a financial genius, posted a long, tear-jerking screed on Facebook. It didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious. It spoke of a bitter ex-husband and a jealous father who couldn't stand to see his daughter happy. It painted a picture of a poor, innocent girl whose joy was maliciously snatched away by a man who puts money before his own child. The post was flooded with sympathetic, angry face emojis. I was about to ignore it when my phone buzzed with a notification. My brother, David, had commented on Karen's post. His response was not emotional. It was surgical. For clarity, he wrote, the gift was a loan the girl's stepdad couldn't get without fraudulently using her real father's financial information. The real father is the man who quietly paid for her entire life for 18 years and put over $90,000 aside for her college education. At the party, the daughter publicly stated, "My real dad never did anything for me." It seems he has finally decided to honor her assessment. It's not about jealousy. It's about consequences for a very public and cruel betrayal. The comments section went silent. The battle lines were drawn. 2 days after the social media skirmish, Derek called. I had been expecting it. I let his call go to voicemail the first time, just to let him stew. He called back instantly. This time I answered. "What the hell did you tell the bank?" he demanded, his voice tight with a fury that felt performative, like he was playing the part of the wrong man. There was no hello, no preamble. "The truth, Derek," I said calmly, picturing him pacing around his rented living room. "It's a concept you might want to familiarize yourself with." I told them I didn't authorize my name or my finances to be used as collateral for your grand gesture. That's all. You sabotaged this. For her. You couldn't just let her have one nice thing. He shot back, his voice rising. I let out a short, sharp laugh. A nice thing? You mean a monthly payment of $340 that neither you nor she could afford? You call that a nice thing? You strapped a debt to her back and called it a gift. Even worse, you used my good name to do it. You stood there soaking up the applause for a spectacle you couldn't actually pay for. That's not a gift, Derek. That's a con. He was silent for a moment, the wind clearly taken out of his sails. The anger in his voice deflated, replaced by something else, desperation. Look, man, he said, his tone shifting dramatically. Okay, I can't afford that car payment long term. My debt to income is maxed out. I was just trying to do something nice, you know? I figured she'd get a job, take it over in a few months. Then you shouldn't have signed the papers, I said flatly. You wanted to play the hero. Heroes don't get to back out when the dragon sends them a bill. He sighed a long, weary sound. The bravado was completely gone. Now came the real reason for his call. What about the college fund? He asked, his voice small. Sarah said you took it. I didn't take anything. It was my account, Derek. Money in my name. I simply moved my money from one of my accounts to another. The money I was planning to give to Emma. But, as she so clearly stated, she already has someone to invest in her future. That's you, isn't it? That was the whole point of the speech, right? To anoint you as the new provider. I never said I was replacing you, he said, a hint of panic in his voice. You didn't have to say it. I counter, my voice like ice. You just had to let Emma say it while you stood there, smiling, accepting all the credit like a king. You wanted the crown, Derek. Guess what? It comes with a kingdom to manage. Enjoy your reign. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the sound of a man trapped. Come on, Art. Don't make Emma suffer for this, he pleaded. It was the final, pathetic gambit, hiding behind my daughter. I'm not making Emma suffer, I said, my words slow and deliberate. I'm holding her, and you, accountable. She chose you, so you get to be her father, in every sense of the word. Goodbye, Derek. I hung up, feeling not a shred of pity. He hadn't just tried to humiliate me. He had tried to use me. The desperation in his voice wasn't for Emma. It was for himself. The con man had been exposed. The next day, Sunday, my phone rang. The caller ID was Emma. My heart gave a painful lurch. This was the call I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. I let it ring, composing myself, then answered. Dad. Her voice was small and thick with tears. The sound of it, the one I had soothed since she was a baby, still had the power to twist my insides. Hello, Emma, I said, my tone neutral. Dad, why did you take my college money? She asked between sobs. The question was so direct, so devoid of any understanding of what had happened, that it took my breath away. Emma, let's be precise, I said, my voice hardening despite myself. I transferred my money from an account in my name into another one of my accounts. The money you are referring to is the fund I built for you over 18 years. The fund from the father who, according to you, never did anything. But I didn't mean it like that, she cried, the classic retreat of someone who doesn't want to face the consequences of their words. Then how did you mean it, Emma? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Because you looked right at me. You weren't talking to Derek. You weren't talking to your mom. You were talking to me. You want to make sure I heard every single word. You want it to hurt. So please, explain to me the way you meant it. She was silent, except for her ragged breathing. I was excited about the car, she finally whispered. The car, I said, my voice flat. The car that got repossessed because the man who gave it to you couldn't actually afford it. The car he only managed to get by fraudulently using my name on the loan application. Are we talking about that car, Emma? More silence. The sobs had stopped. I could picture her on the other end, stunned. It was clear Sarah and Derek had fed her a very different version of the story. Emma, do you understand what happened? I pressed on, my voice losing its edge and becoming weary. Your stepfather engineered a public spectacle with money he didn't have. He used my financial stability as a safety net and then let you, his willing accomplice, humiliate me in front of our entire world. And now that there are real financial consequences, he's nowhere to be found. He can't step up. I'm sorry, she whispered, and for the first time, it sounded genuine. I didn't know. I didn't mean to hurt you. Emma, I've been hurt before. This isn't just about my feelings anymore, I said, the finality of my decision settling over me like a shroud. This is about you making a choice. You're an adult. You stood up in front of everyone, and you chose Derek as your father. Now you have to live with that choice. You can't publicly reject me and then privately expect me to keep paying your bills. It doesn't work that way. But what about college? She asked, her voice trembling again. The scholarship doesn't cover everything. What about it? I replied, the question hanging in the air between us. Derek will figure it out. He's your father now. She hung up. I stared at my phone, my hand shaking slightly. I felt no victory, no satisfaction, just a profound, aching sadness. The little girl whose fears I had soothed with a blueprint was gone. In her place was an adult I've barely recognized, an adult who now had to learn that some foundations, once broken, can't be easily repaired. The weeks that followed were a study in the stark reality of consequences. The dramatic phone calls ceased, replaced by a grim, unfolding new normal. Through the family grapevine, mostly my brother David, who heard things from our cousin Jake, I pieced together Emma's new life. She'd gotten a job almost immediately, working double shifts as a waitress at a local diner. The same diner we used to go to for pancakes on Saturday mornings when she was little. The thought sent a pang through my chest. Friends of hers started posting on social media about how hard she was working to save for college, casting her as a heroic victim of a cruel father. David continued his role as the stoic fact-checker, occasionally dropping a clarifying comment that would silence the narrative for a day or two. I learned she had successfully applied for student loans to cover the gap left by the Emma Fund. She was taking on debt, the very thing I had worked for 18 years to prevent. She was also applying for work-study programs. She was, in short, being forced to do for herself what I had always done for her. Part of me was proud of her resilience. A larger part was heartbroken that it had come to this. One evening, Sarah called. Her tone was different now. No rage, no shrieking. Just a flat, exhausted resignation. She's working herself to the bone, Art, she said, her voice heavy. She's exhausted. She looks like she's lost 10 pounds. It's called responsibility, Sarah, I said, my voice gentle but firm. It's a hard lesson for some. Derek says he can help with some of the costs, she offered, though her voice lacked conviction. How much can he help? I asked, genuinely curious. There was a pause. He's thinking maybe he can cover her textbooks and supplies for the first semester, she said, as if this were a significant contribution. I couldn't help it. A dry, humorless laugh escaped me. Textbooks. So, the man who was going to invest in her future, the man who took a bow for a $25,000 car, can muster maybe $2,000 for her actual education. Is that about right? He's doing his best, she said weakly. Sarah, I put away over $90,000 for her future. Derek can maybe manage textbooks. Do you finally see the difference? Do you understand what she threw away? She made a mistake, Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking. A terrible mistake. She knows that now. And now she's learning that mistakes have consequences, I replied. This isn't a game. This is her life. A life she chose to recenter around him. His best is what she gets now. The conversation ended, as they all did, with no resolution. I hung up the phone and looked around my quiet living room. I saw the ghost of a little girl with a scraped knee, of a teenager stressing about the SATs, of a young woman excitedly showing me her acceptance letter. I had done my best, too. For 18 years, I had done my best, and it had been thrown back in my face. Emma was learning about responsibility, and I was learning the painful lesson of letting go. A week later, there was a knock on my door. It was Maria, Emma's godmother and one of Sarah's oldest friends. She was a kind, level-headed woman who had always managed to stay neutral in the post-divorce dynamics. She stood on my porch holding a plate of cookies, an olive branch I knew came with a purpose. "Can I come in, Art?" she asked, her eyes full of a sad sympathy. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, the plate of cookies between us on the coffee table like a centerpiece for a negotiation. "I'm not here to take sides," she began, true to form. "I'm here because I love all of you, and this is tearing everyone apart. Sarah is a wreck, and Emma—" I I saw her yesterday, Art. She looks like a ghost. She's learned her lesson. She's suffering. I listened, nodding slowly. I appreciated her intentions, her kindness. But the word suffering grated on me. Maria, thank you for coming. I mean that, I said. But this stopped being about teaching Emma a lesson the moment she said those words. A lesson is when you take away a teenager's phone for a week. This is a realignment of reality. She looked at me, confused. What do you mean? For her entire life, I explained, leaning forward, I was a utility, like the electricity or the water. Always there, always working in the background, completely taken for granted. The moment I was no longer useful to her narrative, the moment Derek offered something shinier, she flipped the switch. She cut me off. All I did was stop the current from flowing from my side. But she's your daughter, and I love her. I interrupted, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't let myself feel in weeks. Which is what makes this so damn hard. But this wasn't about love for her. It was about status. Derek offered her a fantasy, a shortcut to feeling special and admired. He bought her a car, and she thought that made him a better father. I offered her a future, built brick by brick over 18 years. She chose the fantasy. Now she has to live in the real world, the one where things cost money and actions have consequences. I finally allowed the full depth of my hurt to show in my voice. It wasn't about the money, Maria. It was never about the money. It was about erasure. They stood on that deck and tried to erase 18 years of my life. 18 years of being a father. They tried to render me invisible. And for what? For a car Derek couldn't even afford? For a moment of applause. Maria just listened, her eyes welling up. She finally understood it wasn't about pride or anger. It was about a fundamental, existential wound. What can I do? She asked softly. Nothing, I said, my voice quiet again. There is nothing to do. The choice was made. The consequences are in motion. She needs to see this through. She needs to learn, on her own, the difference between a shiny facade and a solid foundation. She left the cookies on the table. Neither of us had touched them. She came on a Sunday evening, just as the sun was setting. I saw her pull up to the curb in a beat-up old Toyota that I assumed was a new purchase, a testament to her diner shifts. She just sat in the car for a long time, and I watched her from the window, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. Finally, she got out and walked slowly to my front door. The knock was hesitant. I opened it. She looked older than she had just 2 months ago. She was thinner, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. The defiant spark she'd had at the party was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. "Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" I nodded and stepped aside. "Come in, Emma." We sat in the living room, the same room where Maria had tried to broker peace, the same room where I used to help Emma with her geometry proofs. The silence was heavy, filled with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. She started to cry, not the hysterical sobs of our last phone call, but silent, weary tears that slid down her cheeks. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice choked. "I know what I said was wrong. It was the stupidest, most horrible thing I've ever done." I looked at her, my daughter, my only child, and felt the last vestiges of my anger dissolve, leaving only a vast, desolate sadness. "I'm not angry with you anymore, Emma," I said, and it was the truth. "I'm disappointed, and I'm hurt, but the anger is gone." "Then why won't you help me?" she asked, the question that was at the heart of it all. "If you're not angry, why won't you help me with college?" "Because this isn't about my anger," I said, trying to make her understand. "This is about your choice. You stood on that deck, and you chose him. You can't have it both ways. You can't publicly anoint him as your father and then privately expect me to continue playing the part. My role in your life, according to you, was to never do anything. I am finally honoring your assessment." "But he can't," she blurted out, her voice rising with desperation. "He can't afford it, Dad. It was all a lie. The fancy car, the talk about investments, it's all fake. Sarah told me. They're broke." I nodded slowly. "I know, but that was the man you chose to champion. That was the man you humiliated me for." I leaned forward, my voice soft but insistent. "Emma, let me ask you something. How much do you think I've spent on you over the years?" She looked confused. I don't know. I do. I ran the numbers. Between child support for 11 years, half of all your school expenses, dance lessons, your phone, car insurance, senior trips, laptops, and the college fund, it's just over $200,000. Not in grand gestures, Emma. In small, steady, invisible payments. $200,000 to build a foundation for your life. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The number was incomprehensible to her. Derek, I continued, offered you a $25,000 car that he couldn't afford and let it get repossessed 2 weeks later. Do you today, sitting here in this room, finally understand the difference between what I did for you and what he did? She was quiet for a long time, the only sound her ragged breathing. Her gaze dropped to her hands, twisting in her lap. Finally, she looked up, her eyes clear and filled with a devastating understanding. Yes, she whispered. I really messed up, didn't I? Yes, you did, I said, my voice devoid of triumph. Is there any way to fix this? She asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her last hope. I looked at my daughter, the young woman sitting before me, and I knew what I had to say. Emma, you didn't just hurt my feelings. You publicly disowned me as a father. You told our entire world that I was worthless to you. An apology is a start, but it doesn't undo that. It doesn't change the choice you made. Fixing this, that's on you now. You have to live with your choice. You have to build your own foundation. She didn't argue. She didn't cry anymore. She just nodded, a single, sharp dip of her head. She stood up looking defeated. Okay, Dad, she said and left. I watched her get into her beat-up Toyota and drive away, leaving me alone in the quiet house with the ghosts of the past and the reality of the present. 3 months later, the world had settled into its new, altered shape. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were beginning to turn. Life went on, as it always does. Emma was at the state university. She got into student loans and a work-study job in the campus library. Occasionally, she would text me. They weren't requests for money or help. They were small, tentative updates. Got a B+ on my first poli-sci paper. The library is quiet. I like it. It's hard. I would read them, my heart aching with a complex mix of pride and sorrow. I would usually wait a day, then text back something simple. Good work, or keep at it. The door between us was no longer sealed shut, but it was just barely cracked open. It was a start. I heard through David that things at Sarah and Derek's house were tense. The financial strain, no longer hidden by grand gestures, was a constant source of friction. The illusion Derek had worked so hard to build had crumbled, leaving only the grim reality of maxed-out credit cards and a rented lifestyle they could barely afford. I felt no joy in this, only a weary sense of inevitability. As for me, I had made an investment of my own. I didn't buy a flashy fishing boat or a sports car. I used a small portion of the Arthur Fund, as I now called it, to buy a sturdy, used 17-foot Boston whaler. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a tool. It was solid, reliable, and built to last. It was my kind of boat. This morning, I was out on the water with David. The sun was rising over the bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cool and salty. We weren't talking much, just enjoying the quiet companionship and the gentle rocking of the boat. You ever think about giving her the money? David asked, breaking the silence as he reeled in his line. I looked out at the horizon, at the vast, open water. I think about her all the time, I admitted. The money is different now. It's not hers anymore. It was a gift she returned. Now it's my peace of mind. It's my early retirement. It's my self-respect converted into a number. I cut the engine, and we drifted in the quiet morning. I finally understood. My fatherhood wasn't defined by her acceptance or her applause. It was defined by the 18 years of actions I had taken, the silent, steady work of building her foundation. Whether she stood on it and praised me, or stood on it and cursed me, the foundation itself was real. It had done its job. She was at college. She was making her way. Emma had made her choice at that graduation party, a choice born of youthful ignorance and the allure of shiny things. And I had made mine in the cold, quiet dawn that followed, a choice to reclaim my own value. The relationship with my daughter was broken, perhaps irreparably. But for the first time in a long time, sitting in my small, sturdy boat on the calm water, I felt whole. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a just one, and it was finally peaceful.